All right, my jet lagged friend, you're back. God, tell you what, that Italian restaurant we ate at in Moscow, spectacular.
Bottega Siciliana is one of the top 3 Italians in town. It's really, really good. Yeah. I was there last Sunday. Actually.
Oh, man. Okay, well, we'll go from talking something positive. So now let's get on to the heart of the matter.
Yes.
I've titled this sort of the U.S. war on BRICS. And I maintain that what's been going on with Iran is an extension of that war on BRICS, that the terrorist attack in Kashmir was part of that. I think the United States has launched a broad campaign to try to destroy BRICS. What's your take?
Definitely. It's been my main theme, Larry, for months now. Practically every major call in the past few months, this is the main theme. And I put it on the headline already. Well, I'm going to BRICS in Rio. I'm leaving on Monday. I expect to have some serious conversations over there, especially with Brazilian critics of the Brazilian presidency of BRICS, which for the moment is meek, to say it diplomatically.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll try to get to the bottom of it. And obviously, if people from the Ministry of Foreign Relations decide to talk to me, because they prefer not to, because they know what they're going to hear. And of course, with the delegates from other BRICS nations that will be coming to Rio later next week. BRICS starts on Sunday next week, in fact. Well, what we heard in the St. Petersburg Forum was not very, very good. There was an excellent panel on perspectives for reforming the international financial system. And obviously, there were talks about BRICS. There were some pretty good, I would say solid panelists, like one of the directors of VTB, which is the second largest Russian bank. There was my friend Shusentsov from McGill. Shusentsov, he supervises the international relations courses at McGill. He's a very, very good analyst. Unfortunately, they cut him off after 10 minutes. And from Brazil online, my dear friend Paulo Nogueira Batista, who is one of the co-founders of the BRICS Bank, of the NDB. We'll be meeting next week in Rio. And Paulo, in 10 minutes, he destroyed the whole thing. He said, look, let's stop with this hyper-polite talk shop and go for the kill. Because the war is against all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians in the panel, they were doing, no, we have to go slow, one step at a time. And Paulo went straight to the point. And Paulo knows how the BRICS Bank works, and he knows how the BRICS organization works from the inside. He's one of the very few. And one of the very few, because he's out of government, he can speak his mind, But there's going to be serious problems this year. I wonder if the Brazilian presidency will understand, first of all, that the war was hybrid against BRICS, and now it's even hot, considering what happened in Iran. And this is just the beginning of a very long war against all of them, especially the top BRICS, which are under sanctions, Russia, China, and Iran. And, I foresee, sparks will fly, definitely. But it does not look good in terms of, for the rest of this year. First of all, because the Brazilians set up a BRICS summit in the middle of the year, which in itself is totally absurd. So what are they going to do the rest of the year? They would need at least some extra very important meetings. And then this is something that Paulo suggested last year already, when he was in Moscow for a few days. The G20 is going to be in South Africa. Why not profit from the fact that most of the BRICS heads of state will be there as well. And then you do a post-summit meeting, a wrap up of the BRICS year, right? I wonder if they're going to accept it. I think many of us will put pressure over there in Rio for something like this to happen. And other Brazilian economists, they completely agree with this position. So we have a conceptual problem this year. And everybody's waiting what BRICS are going to do next year. Meanwhile, Larry, the good part is what we call the BRICS Test Lab keeps advancing. So they are testing different models. They have conversations about different forms of de-dollarization, trade in bilateral currencies and multilateral currencies expanding all over the spectrum. So these are the positives, right? But I think it's really time for BRICS to step up and be much more incisive, which is what the Russians were preparing last year. The summit last year in Kazan was amazing because the Russians worked for 10 months non-stop to make it a success. And it was a global success with the new members, the new partners, etc. And this year, Larry, practically nothing happened.
Yeah.
This January, practically nothing. It's very distressing. Go ahead, please.
No, let me ask about CIPS, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System.
The Chinese system, yes.
CIPS.
CIPS.
Did that come up at St. Petersburg and being integrated into BRICS?
What we learned, Larry, is that the Chinese are going all the way to, let's say, seduce partners to start using CIPS, bypassing SWIFT. So this, this vector of the Chinese being on the forefront of bypassing SWIFT using CIPS, wow. Now it's, to remember, the purple is highway star velocity,
Well, I mean, what's my understanding is that May marked the first time that transactions in CIPS exceeded anything taking place in SWIFT.
Yes, it's true. I read that, yesterday. You're right. Yes.
And it's digital. It uses blockchain technology.
Automatic, immediate.
Yeah. And so
because SWIFT is very slow, as you know.
SWIFT is it's a buggy whip.
Exactly. And sometimes it takes days to have a transaction. It's completely absurd.
So so I wonder if a system like that is actually going to help break through, or undermine the U.S. system and bring BRICS more to the forefront.
Well, in terms of Southeast Asia, Central Asia, where China does business with all the major 5 Central Asian countries and increasing business. And even with their partners in West Asia, like Emirates or Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, etc., CIPS is the way to go. Considering that the UAE is at BRICS, at the table as one of the members, full members, and Saudi Arabia is over the wall, but they're still hedging their bets.
Yeah.
But they love the idea because they do a lot of trade with China. And China obviously saying to the Saudis, look, let's bypass SWIFT in our transactions. And the Saudis won't say no. There's no question about that. So this is one of the ways to go. Absolutely. Yeah. So when we talk about BRICS Lab, something like that, it's part of the test lab. And then when we have the integration with the Russian system and then with the Iranian system as well, which will happen sooner or later, of course, because of the economic power, financial power of China, CIPS is much more important than the other ones. But the other ones are substantial, especially the Russian system.
Yeah.
Then we could have, for instance, direct transactions among major BRICS totally bypassing SWIFT, which is something that could happen from this year to the next.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's turn to the recent, I call it the temporary halt in the war against Iran.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah.
This is. Do you think that let me step back.
Yes.
I'm surprised that Iran stopped, because they literally had their foot on the throat of Israel.
Absolutely correct.
I mean, they had shut down the only two container ports. So no more imports that are coming in and out of Israel. They'd shut down the only international airport. They'd shut down the two oil refineries.
Yes.
Not to mention, even though when you look at the map of the different military and intelligence sites hit, that I don't think Israel could have sustained. They would have lost within another 2 to 3 weeks.
That's what all of us, 2 weeks, roughly, yes.
Why the hell did Iran take its foot off the throttle?
Well, okay, I'll try to give you and our audience, Larry, what really happened in Moscow on Monday. The famous Putin-Lavrov-Arakshi meeting. Can you imagine? A foreign minister comes, instead of meeting only with his counterpart, he has a direct audience with the president, and it lasted long. They discussed everything. And yes, he brought a personal letter from Ayatollah Khamenei.
Yeah.
We don't know the detail. Nobody knows the details. No leaks whatsoever. But the letter was delivered by Arakshi. The signs that came from the Kremlin were immensely interesting by what they did not reveal. For instance, Peskov said, well, it depends on the Iranians. If they ask us anything, they ask us, we will consider. Very, very significant. At the same time, Trump was already pissed because instead of the Iranians talking to him, they were talking to Putin directly. And he started to spin a lie that almost simultaneously, according to one of his posts, Iran and Israel approached me for a ceasefire. That's a lie. Yeah. Israel begged him for a ceasefire. And this is not, everybody knows that this is exactly what happened. Because, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, they knew that they were getting eviscerated. Yeah. The key nodes of their economy and the revamped strategy by the IRGC was, we're going to paralyze their economy in 2 weeks, maximum 3. Because they had started to use their really, really powerful missiles, the Khaibar, more Haji Qassems, more Fatah 1s, the ballistics, the hypersonics. So, virtually at the same time, what we don't know in the chain of events, if there was, I would say, shadow play interaction between Washington and Moscow, with the Russians telling the Americans, look, maybe you have an off-ramp. The Iranians are going all the way. This is what they told us. The Israelis are begging you for a ceasefire. What if we talk to the Iranians? Take the ceasefire for now. So obviously, there's no way, Larry, no one can have this chain of events at 100%. But there might have been some sort of, let's say, subterranean channels, and this got to Trump. And what Trump did, true to character, was to jump on the opportunity and claim for himself the success of the partial ceasefire. So this scenario is quite plausible. And the fact that Putin said something yesterday that it's still ringing in my mind. He actually said, and it was quoted by TASS literally, the conflict between Israel and Iran is a thing of the past. Wow. But it's not. He knows that it's not. He knows that everybody knows that it's not. Like you said, this is bold, right? What makes him being so, he knows something that obviously we don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's exactly what happened between Monday and Tuesday early this week that led to the partial ceasefire, and what was exactly the Russian definitive contribution for the ceasefire, considering, as you correctly pointed out, that Iran was on the way to turn Israel into hell.
let's come back to the letter that Arakshi carried from the Ayatollah. So I've tried to. So I'm thinking, well, the letter could have said to Putin, "Screw off. We don't want to have any relationship with you." Okay. Exactly. I don't think that's what it said.
Definitely, that was the last thing to be on the letter, Larry. Yes.
I could only come up with two other options that he could possibly include. One was, hey, you remember that mutual defense pact you offered us that we turned down? You know what? We thought about it some more, and I think that's a really good idea. And if it's still on the table, we'd like to get back into that. Or three, and these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. We've come to the conclusion that we've been completely betrayed by the IAEA. We've tried to play the Western game. We cooperate. We signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We allowed the inspectors, and as a result of that, we've been attacked. And there's not one word of condemnation from that. Therefore, we've taken the decision that we feel we have no alternative but to build a bomb.
Right. Larry, it's a mix of 2 and 3, but without the bomb. Okay, let's try to unwrap it. The strategic treaty that first was ratified by the Duma and then by the Majlis in Tehran, there was a gap of 2 months for the Majlis to ratify it. Big mistake. Why did they wait for so long? You know why? Because of the internal conflict in Tehran. Mm-hmm. And this internal conflict is extremely complicated because now it's not only 2 factions, there are 3. The first one, of course, the circle of Ayatollah Khamenei around himself and the circle, very close circle around him, including, remember that guy that the Israelis said that they had killed?
Yeah.
He resurfaced on a public square in Tehran, Ali Shamkhani. And Ali Shamkhani is really top level. The second, and IRGC. Khamenei, the circle, IRGC. The second is the so-called reformists, Pezeshkian, but especially the brain behind all of that, even if he's not part of the government, Zarif. And the number 3 is secular nationalists that are not in favor of a theocratic democracy like the current system, but they are patriots.
Right.
So there is a clash at the level of the parliament and reaching, to the uppermost levels of power as well. So this explains, number 1, why it took 2 months for the Majlis to ratify a very, very important treaty like that. And number 2, which is something that Putin alluded to himself, saying, yes, the Persians are very proud, of course. We offered the full military relationship with them, and they declined. So this is a partial strategic partnership. It's not like the one they clinched with the DPRK, which is a full military treaty.
Right.
So obviously now Khamenei and the IRGC, they reconsidered everything and said, maybe we should have a full military treaty. So I wonder if there's going to be some sort of addendum to what they signed and was ratified by both parliaments.
Yeah.
And of course, it's clear that Arakshi arrived in Moscow with a new shopping list. There's no question about that. And this is being, I wouldn't say 100, it's being speculated in the Iranian media. Everything, Su-35s, more S-400s, you name it, long list. And this is what they need, essentially. Because the western part of Iran, there are practically no air defenses.
Yeah. Well,
and the terrible thing, which I'm sure you know all about this, Larry, it's basically drones coming from Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
So Iran has to review their relationship with Azerbaijan. Yesterday. It's very, very dangerous. It was not Israeli jets or Israeli missiles. It was drones launched from Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
So all this, evolving. And obviously, the relationship between Russia and Iran at a military level will be much, much closer now than it was a few weeks ago.
Well, in fact, Andrei Martyanov pointed out
yes,
that there was one S-400 and one S-300 in Iran.
Right, only one S-400 that we know. Andrei is right, exactly.
It was at Bushehr. And
at Bushehr, exactly. Which, by the way, was attacked.
Yeah, I was going to say, did it get attacked? No.
No, in fact, it was not Bushehr itself. I think something landed beside Bushehr.
Yeah, there was an attack there's a military airfield about 7 miles away. That was attacked.
You're right.
The Bushehr power plant complex.
The Bushehr power plant was not attacked because it's protected, yes.
So, my thinking, again, I try to be practical about these things. Yes. If I was Iran, I'd immediately go to Russia and say, hey, we want you to have your personnel at every single one of our nuclear facilities, bring the S-400s to protect them, and put the U.S. on notice that any attack on those sites would be an attack on you.
This is what they should do, Larry. And probably coming from the IRGC, I would say they are seriously considering it. Yeah. Well, they learned their lessons the hardest way, man. Because the attacks on Iran, some of them were, and even today in Iranian media, they are recognizing that, yes, some of the attacks were devastating, but we can recover. But for them, it's going to take much longer because they're alone. There's nobody helping them. Yeah. Israel, of course, the Americans can throw everything, the special cargo shipments, whatever. Iran, now they have to start from scratch again, and not to mention the civilian installations.
Well, so is your take, do you think that Russia and China both appreciate that Iran is a critical chess piece? Now, because I've seen, I don't know if you saw the comment by John Helmer, I think it was completely off base, but he insisted that Putin was lying about having offered a defense pact to Iran.
Bullshit. I'm sorry. Yeah. This is total bullshit. First of all, because this guy has no access to what really happens in Moscow. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
The point is, which I keep emphasizing column after column, this is the hard note of BRICS. It's not India. I chose to call them the new Primakov triangle, RIC, instead of India, Iran, because the three of them are very, very powerful civilization states. They don't hedge their bets, unlike India. They're not sitting on any fence. They don't want to be part of the Western system. They don't want to be a sub-colony of the US or of the West. Three of them, they are under sanctions. And three of them, as you know very well later, are considered existential threats to the US.
Yeah.
When you put this all together, these are the top three targets. There's no question about that. And of course, this is discussed in Moscow at the top think tank level, at the forums that you usually go when you come to Moscow, at the St. Petersburg forum last week. This is one of the key discussions. Russia has to pay really close attention to Iran because Russia is next.
Yeah.
They identified Iran as the weakest link. After Iran, if they destroy Iran, if they manage to fragment Iran, the next one will be Russia. They tried with Ukraine, it didn't work. They will try again. And of course, the third node, the Chinese, we were observing all this transfixed because, oh shit, if something happens to Iran, first of all, for us, is a national security problem because of all the energy they import. Second, that $400 billion deal, energy versus infrastructure, that they signed in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, a long time ago, keeps going. So these three BRICS, the new Primakov triangle, they know exactly all the machinations. There was an element, I would say, until this week, of Persian pride. This is something that we see when we visit Iran. They have to be proud of at least 2,500 years of civilization, diplomacy, art, culture, etc. They are a civilization state at this level, up there.
Right.
Of course, after 40 years of sanctions, they were weakened. Of course, you go to some some know. Many, like, I in last month, can you believe it? I travel a lot in Iran, from the Caspian to the Persian Gulf, all the way to the Iran-Pakistani borders. And when you see the infrastructure in many of these places, it's crumbling. Why? Because it was not renovated in over 40 years.
Yeah.
One of these, their port in the Caspian, wow, I thought it was in a very poor part of South America, for instance. There's practically no infrastructure. How can they have cargo ships coming from Astrakhan in Russia, crossing the Caspian, going to this port, and then going all the way to the Persian Gulf with that level of non-infrastructure? Impossible. Mm-hmm. No wonder the Russians, they want to build a railway marginal to the Caspian, because it will be cheaper and faster and better infrastructure instead of crossing the Caspian, and then you arrive at a port where there's nothing. So you see these kind of problems everywhere. No, non-upgraded infrastructure. But what our great friend Alistair Crook talks about, when he talks about resistance, Alistair is very much impressed with what he saw in Iran many years ago. Alistair went to Qom. He talked to Ayatollahs, So when you do something like that, you understand the theological aspect, and at the same time, you understand the substrata of this ethics of resistance. It's impossible to explain this to the West, Larry. Absolutely impossible.
Yeah. Well, the thing with Iran, it strikes me, is at least even prior to June 13th, there's still sort of this, and it existed in Russia too, this desire to be liked by the West, to have this, they want to have a relationship with the West. Yeah, and there's always
Larry. It's the people around the president. For instance, whenever I asked about Pezeshkian, I always had an extremely polite answer, but basically saying, yeah, he's too weak.
Yeah.
And obviously, the problem is he was elected, democratic elections. Now, I would say that most of the country is starting to understand he's not the right man for the historical moment. Raisi was.
Right.
Raisi was, wow, he was tough and knew the stakes. And he said, no, accommodation under their terms, no way. And that's the problem with Pezeshkian. He's still striving for some sort of accommodation. He believed in all the kabuki since the beginning of the negotiations. He only woke up the day that the nuclear installations were bombed.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote yesterday that if there's an official in Iran that somehow believes that they can have an accommodation with the West,
exactly,
they should be removed.
They should be removed. This means the current president and the people around him. That's complicated, and a lot of people in the Majlis. But you see, the Majlis is not. The parliament in Tehran is fascinating. I went in the past to some of the sessions. It's as lively as a parliament in the West. There's real debate. Did you see that they unanimously voted to block the Strait of Hormuz? Even the reformists, because they saw this as an attack on Iran, on national unity. And that's very, very important. This is one of the reasons for the so-called ceasefire. One of my old school deep state sources, Larry, I don't know if you know him. One day I'll throw you the name and you tell me if you know or not. He said that the CIA told Trump directly, look, the Chinese are terrified about the possible closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Of course they are, because their energy comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And this was one of the reasons why Trump decided to go ahead with the bombing, because he knew that the Iranians would later on say, okay, we're going to block the Strait of Hormuz. But the thing turned around when I'm not sure Trump, because he doesn't see the big picture. Some people around him told him, look, if they close the Strait of Hormuz, the global economy disappears in a few weeks, days or weeks. And then he started to have taco.
Yeah.
Then he went taco.
Once I looked at the numbers, that 80% of the oil coming out of the Persian Gulf, coming through the Straits, goes to Asia. And I'm thinking, why is Iran going to take an action that's going to hurt Asia, where the Asians are supporting Iran? That didn't make sense.
It would be a selective blockade. This is what they were discussing, Larry.
Yeah, selective blockade.
In this interval between the parliament voting, okay, let's block the Strait of Hormuz, and the final decision, which has to come from the Supreme Council and Khamenei himself. They were discussing, okay, maybe a selective blockade. Everything that will be shipped to Europe and the West, blocked.
Yeah.
Everything that is going to Russia, China, South Korea, whatever, no problem. Yeah. What the Yemenis were doing in the Bab al-Mandeb for months. And it worked. It was a selective blockade of the Red Sea.
Yeah. And that would make sense.
That would make sense, exactly. And as you know, Larry, the Persians are, it's a sign of a real culture and civilization. They are cool, calculating, very well informed. They take their time to make a big decision. They analyze all angles. They're very good at designing scenarios and all that. They're very, very serious people.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yes, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say to follow that up. Notice the difference in civilian casualties inflicted by Iran and Israel, what Israel did in Iran.
Exactly.
I mean, it was like 36. A very small number, relatively for all of the missiles that went off throughout all Israel. Is less than 100 people were killed. Whereas, in Iran, the number was approaching 1,000, I think.
And they attacked civilian installations. They attacked civilian apartment buildings. They attacked the Iranian equivalent of the BBC, IRIB. We were there. Yeah. That is the major building where you have all the major offices. They have an outstanding newsroom, an old school newsroom, 3 enormous connected rooms, where they have newsrooms for all their local bulletins, provincial news, etc., international news, the big studios, etc. Can you imagine? It's the equivalent of bombing the BBC or France 2 here, or France International, whatever, or Al Jazeera. It's the same thing. And they do it. Wow, come on. These people, they kill journalists, Larry. We know that. They killed 270-something journalists in Gaza. They kill doctors in hospitals,
Well, and now I think the press contacts I did have on that, they've abandoned WhatsApp. And so they recognize that WhatsApp is a compromised application.
Finally. Wow, can you believe that every time many of us, when we travel to West Asia, we see government officials using WhatsApp, and you have to explain to them, please don't do this. Same thing in Iran. A lot of people at governmental level in Iran, they were using WhatsApp until yesterday. It's absurd. It's totally absurd.
Yeah. So where do you think, Donald Trump's painted himself into a corner because he said,
"Yes,
we've actually obliterated, destroyed all the uranium. They didn't take anything out." And yet, I'm hearing through my sources that the intelligence community basically came to the intelligence community came to the conclusion, even before all this started, that Iran had removed the enriched uranium from those facilities.
Absolutely, 400 kilos.
Yeah.
And nobody knows where the uranium is now. Did you see Grossi, that pathetic Argentinian, totally bought at the head of IAEA? He's complaining out loud. We don't know where the uranium is now. And you never know, because now it's in a secret location, and basically the IAEA is going to be expelled from Iran.
Well, they should be. Yeah, I mean,
It should be.
I'm thinking of it practically. The only way I believe the only way Israel could target those nuclear scientists was with information they obtained from the IAEA.
They had inside information, exactly, from the inspectors, exactly.
Yeah. Now, whether
I can't believe that the Iranians were not paying attention to this. Once again, Larry, they were too naive, and they were expecting that the other side would play fair. They never.
Yeah. We signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We're allowing the video cameras, 24/7 in our facilities. Hey, we're gonna get pat on the back. No, they got a kick in the balls.
Exactly. And now they're gonna exit the NPT. This is practically agreed. There's going to be a vote soon, and they would only rejoin the NPT if Israel joins the NPT. And we know this is not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, what do you make of what I've heard out of Moscow? Is Moscow was sort of saying, no, don't abandon the IAEA yet. Why is Moscow taking that line? You got any insights on that?
No, I don't. And I wonder why they would be saying that to Iran, considering how the IAEA acted, and now it's proven that there was spying going on, and Israel would never know exactly where some particular stuff was if inspectors had not inspected it on the spot. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, the Russian position is very complicated, Larry. It's very, very complicated. Everything that we learn, it's tidbits and nuggets of information, and especially inferring what we hear from Putin or from Peskov, sometimes from Medvedev when in his outbursts. Because, of course, and Putin mentioned that a few days ago, we have almost 1.5 million Russians and former Soviet citizens in Israel. Israel is practically a Russian country. You can interpret it any way you like. Mm-hmm. But what you can interpret it for sure is that obviously we cannot completely antagonize that genocidal system because we have a lot of double passport citizens living there, and they are Russian citizens as well. So this puts him in a very uncomfortable position. Very, very uncomfortable. And as we know, the Zionist lobby in Moscow is very strong as well. Yeah. And he has to compound with these people. This includes banking interests, some of the top oligarchs, it's an extremely touchy subject. And many of us, for instance, if we try to publish related to that in Russian media, they politely tells us, look, this maybe we can't. I understand their motives, but it's a pity because this should be public domain, not only inside Russia, but outside as well. And of course, from the point of view of Putin and the Security Council, they had to navigate all that. What they do know, even when they say, okay, it's not our war. Our war is here on our western borderlands. Correct. But now they know that war in West Asia is also their war. Mm-hmm. Because they have one of their strategic partners involved, and they know that the war is against BRICS as a whole. So now this is more than clear to the people who make the decisions in Moscow. So, and of course, the Chinese is also, it's so complicated. This morning, I was looking at Chinese reactions to the Chinese are very analysts. I'm talking about think tanks and good top professors are some of the top Chinese universities. When you read what they're analyzing, they are very diffident of it. First of all, because they don't understand the Islamic Republic, how the system works. Mm-hmm. There are not many specialists in China. And the ones that do understand, they are Huis. They are Chinese Muslims. And there are not many of them. And they are not in Beijing. For instance, I met one of these guys in Yemen, Larry. He was from Ningxia province, which is very far away from Beijing. So this is a problem. There is a certain misinformation problem among Chinese, and this is one of their top allies and a matter of national security for them. So this is something that has to be worked, short term and long term. And of course, the Chinese are concentrating on their own internal problems and their own possible false flag focus, which is time.
Yeah. Well, do you think? I'm pretty confident that I think Putin and his team understand that the war in Ukraine, the war in Iran, that this is all part of a broader strategy to preserve U.S. hegemony.
Of course.
So they're fighting really a global war. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure the Chinese grasp that yet.
No, they don't, Larry. They don't. And this is for instance, when I talk to my great friend, Professor Zhang Weiwei, it's interesting because some Chinese analysts, and I heard this from other Chinese analysts, he's too Maoist. And he's in favor of the system. I said, what the hell? He was a personal translator of Deng Xiaoping. How close to understanding the reforms of China can you be? Wow, come on. But there are some Chinese who they try to be maybe more, I don't know if they're trying to be more radical or less radical in the end. They don't understand this position. And Professor Zhang Weiwei understands pretty well that this is a war against all BRICS, China included. But when you read some scholars that are trying to be, let's say, more progressive or with a little twist on the official explanations coming from the Politburo. Okay, let's say slightly more independent, but they don't seem to get the big picture. Mm-hmm. How China is they only understand it geoeconomically, but not geopolitically. It's something that I noticed in Shanghai. Everybody understands that the Trump trade war was not against the global South, was against China from the beginning. Yeah, everybody understood that. But if you get into the geopolitical ramifications and the complexity of a war against BRICS, I'm not sure, as you said, I'm not sure they understand the ramifications.
Yeah. Now shifting a little bit to focus on Ukraine and NATO.
Did you see the NATO summit, Larry? What was that?
All right, so we're the same age. So yes. Where did that? Who originated the phrase "Who's your daddy"?
Who's your daddy?
It's a little bit of music trivia, and but there was a British group called the Zombies.
Of course, it's the Zombies who had "Time of the Season," which was one of the best hits of the late 60s.
Yeah. What's your name? Who's your daddy?
What's your name? Who's your daddy? In fact, this is a verse of "Time of the Season," Larry. Now I was looking, which song was this? Obviously. What's your name? Who's your daddy? Dun, 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 dun. Yeah. Well, I had the single. I used to play the single all the time.
I have never seen such a humiliating display.
Yes.
I mean, this is reminiscent of something like out of China where they invented kowtowing.
Yes. But that guy is pathetic, Larry. Everybody hates Tutti Frutti in Holland. He's considered one of the worst, if not the worst, Dutch prime minister ever. What do they do with these people? They kick them up to some international organizations, like they did with Stoltenberg in Norway. Same thing they did with Rutte in Holland. Same thing. But the most important thing is, I try to put it in 5 seconds, in fact. Okay, what did they decide at The Hague? We will continue to be at war with Russia, and soon we'll also be at war with China. These were the decisions.
Yeah.
And of course, the 5%. The 5%.
Well, we saw the shift. I guess you would mark yesterday as the shift in the Russian policy towards the EU and Ukraine's role, with both Medvedev and then Lavrov coming out and basically saying, "Now we used to say that Ukraine could go and become a member of the EU, no problem. Now it's a problem."
No, it's a problem because they understand, Larry, that the EU and NATO is the same thing. The EU is a sort of PR arm of NATO.
Yeah.
The EU is not an independent institution, not to mention the EC, the European Commission, the policy arm of the EU, which is, wow. This is a warmongering organization, completely anti-Russian in every aspect.
Yeah, and what is driving it? Because I could understand at the end of World War II, and with the Soviets continued to occupy, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc., and Germany, that then the animus of the Europeans made, you could explain it. But what explains it now? This is what's so crazy.
Well, the people who are in control of the machinery in Brussels. Not only the institutions of the EU, but especially the European Commission, led by that toxic Medusa. All of us, we know her name, right? And of course, giving too much power to the Baltic Chihuahuas, to Poland, and to Finland. Mm-hmm. Finland, Poland, and the Baltic Chihuahuas, they think that they can start a war against Russia tomorrow. They probably have 2 tanks and 1 ship. And they think they can destroy a nuclear superpower. But really, I'm not making that up. This is the way they think. If you listen to that batshit crazy Estonian, which is only there because von der Leyen lobbied everybody in Brussels to get her as representative of 450 million citizens' foreign policy. This is, I think, in terms of a Kafkaesque absurdity, this beats anything else. Pay attention to everything that she says is never related to a foreign policy understanding of how the EU should position itself in the wider world. It's a Russophobic remark. Yeah. Anything she says, anything. Of course, there is already, there are people in Brussels who are pissed. We have to throw this idiot out, but how? There are no mechanisms for that. Because, unelected, you name it. It's a closed Kafkaesque system,
I don't think people appreciate how small Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia are. Each one of them has fewer people than the borough of Queens in New York City.
Exactly. Exactly. They are literally neighborhoods. Yeah.
No, it's not big. How did you come away with your last visit in Moscow in terms of sensing the Russian attitude with the pace of the war now in Ukraine? It seems that it's accelerating, and they definitely can say, hey, light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely. Well, this month in Moscow was great. It was not only Moscow, because I was at 3 forums back to back. In Nizhny Novgorod, it was a digital forum. It was very, very interesting because we were discussing fake news and the rule of artificial intelligence in depth. Then the next week was the forum in Moscow, where the so-called Forum of the Future, which was I won't get into details. But anyway, this is where Elon Musk was the big superstar.
Yeah, right.
And that was quite something, Larry. In fact, they should have invited you for this. I know, you were there.
I was there. Yeah, I was there.
You were there. Okay, no, I'm mixing it all up. It's a mess. Yeah.
So I wasn't at St. Petersburg, though.
Exactly. But the thing about this forum is I heard some, I would say, extremely dodgy things about the role of Peter Thiel and the former PayPal mafia, and some Russians want to start bringing them closer to Russia, which is, I think, is a terrifying prospect for Russia. But you were there. You saw that as well.
Yeah.
But last week was the real deal, because we had some of the roundtables in St. Petersburg. They were absolutely outstanding. There was a Russia-US roundtable. Was packed. The problem is the Americans were Americans who have been living in Russia for a long time. There were no new Americans that flew in for the panel. Yeah. There was a Russia-China roundtable. That one was also packed. And then we saw a lot of Chinese businessmen who want to do more business in Russia, and provincial governors, heads of state companies discussing Chinese investment in Russia. That was immensely interesting. There was another one on the Arctic Silk Road, which they call the North Sea route. This was my favorite because I got numbers and details about the progress on setting up this connectivity corridor, which obviously the Americans are freaking out because it will be a very viable alternative to the Suez Canal. Mm-hmm. Side by side with the international north-south transport corridor, Russia, Iran, India. By the way, another element of the war, Larry, the Russians cannot allow Iran to be mortally wounded because they are betting a lot on the transportation corridor. Yeah. This is immensely important, and both Russia and and Iran, they know about it, and also the Indians know about it. And the Indians, of course, they sat on the fence on the war. You noticed on the Iran-Israel. I didn't like that at all. But I think for all of us who are following this closely, it spoke volumes, the Indian reaction. And people inside BRICS, they didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. Well, okay, and we were in St. Petersburg. And of course, at the end, we had the plenary session where the Global South was on stage. You had Putin, Vice President of China, President of Indonesia, Prabowo, guest of honor, a guy from Bahrain, head of security, and the Vice President of South Africa on stage with Putin. That was this. Okay, this is the Global South, and the Global South is here. Right. It was an immense statement. So St. Petersburg was very, very important. And of course, there were discussions on BRICS, SCO, ASEAN, everything. And it was a preamble to what happened these past 2 days, which I'm sure people in America have no idea about. There was a meeting of the defense ministers of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of them. Yeah. You know what we had side by side? The defense ministers of, among others, India, Pakistan, and Iran on the same table. This is intense. And we heard from the Iranians that, yes, when they met with the Chinese, they had a shopping list, Larry, including the J-10C fighters. They want to buy Chinese fighters. Of course, they need them. Mm-hmm. So this was very, very important. And yesterday and today, the meeting of the Eurasia Economic Union with Putin in person in Minsk, very, very important. And they have deals of economic deals with a lot of places that are not in Eurasia, including Cuba. So you see the whole thing expanding little by little. All these multilateral organizations with Eurasia as the main focus, of course, because go back to Mackinder, is the center of the world, and they are expanding all over. And obviously, the West, they have no clue what they're doing.
Well, let me on the trust level. Do you think, has there been any damage done to the relationship, let's say, between Putin and Trump in light of what happened in Iran? Because if I'm looking at it as a Russian intelligence officer, I now realize that attempt to kill Putin in Kursk with drones
Yes.
Followed by the drone attacks on the strategic air bases using just days before there's supposed to be these negotiations taking place in Istanbul. Then that whole sort of model was repeated in Iran. And then all of a sudden at that point, you got to realize these just don't appear similar. This is part of a broader plan. I can't trust Donald Trump. That's how I'd come at it.
You're absolutely right. But it goes beyond Donald Trump, probably, Larry. They cannot trust anything coming out from Israel. But they already knew that. Because the modus operandi, the attack on the strategic bombers and the attack in Iran is Mossad-esque.
Yes,
as
yeah.
you know very well. So this was most certainly a Mossad playbook on both instances, and Trump may or may have not known about it, depending on what the people around him are feeding him. Of course, they are feeding him misinformation. That amplifies the problem because, as you know very well, Larry, he doesn't read anything.
Yeah.
So he can be easily fooled. But it's so easy to fool the president of the United States. Well, the previous one was another story because it was a cadaver. This guy, apparently he thinks, he makes decisions, but he's surrounded by sycophants or people who feed him misinformation. And on top of it, he doesn't make the effort to at least read a few reports or even pay attention to some sources of information, real sources of information.
Yeah, well, his rejection of the intelligence community's position. Now, I'm not here to argue that the intelligence community is perfect or always make. I've seen how the sausage is made, but the judgment that they had reached regarding the presence of nuclear weapons in Iran was predicated primarily, I believe, on not only what the IAEA information, but that either the CIA had penetrated that or a third party like Israel had penetrated it, or the French. So they had both sort of the official IAEA, and then you had the classified material coming out from that.
Exactly.
And so they knew. And I guarantee you that now, if they had to come together to make a judgment, I think they would be inclined to say, we don't know.
We don't know. Yeah.
Because, John Mearsheimer's made the case. I could see the Iranians saying, hey, we've cooperated, we've played along, and all we've gotten is attacked. So the only way we can be safe is to have a nuke. I could see those. There are those, I'm sure, in the society, in the military, making that case.
Yes, the IRGC seems to be leaning this way. The problem is the ultimate decision comes from Khamenei, and the precedent fatwas. The first one by Khomeini, and the second one by Khamenei himself. That nuclear weapons are anti-Islam. He will have to revert his own fatwa. And this, in Shiite theological terms, it's a nightmare. He would have to find a way to do it. For the moment, this is where we are. At the same time, the RGC is saying, look, we proved that our ballistic missile program is impeccable. And we are developing even more. We don't need our deterrence in terms of our ballistic missile industry is more than enough. We were on our way. That's the beginning of our conversation. We were on our way to flatten Israel.
Oh, yeah.
Another 2 or 3 weeks. We don't need nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that their research on ballistic missiles will, it's up several notches after that. And they proved that they have very, very good hardware. No question about that. But the theological aspect is very complex in Iran. And I'm sure Khamenei wouldn't like to make a decision like this that reverts everything they had been preaching for decades, even more than that, in terms of nuclear weapon, the concept of a nuclear weapon. But they have a plan B. Their plan B is their ballistic. Why the Americans are so obsessed into eliminating the ballistic missile program in Iran? I remember the JCPOA in Vienna in 2015. I was there for Asia Times at the time, and we had briefings from the Iranian delegation. One of them was by Zarif himself. He spent 3 hours with us. And the main theme was, look, this is not going to work because the Americans want to introduce our ballistic missile program in the negotiation. And Zarif was basically saying, we're walking out. And then John Kerry called Washington and said, look, they're going to walk out. We have to concentrate on the nuclear program. And that's when they finally clinched the deal.
Yeah, well, that's where they're going to come back. I want just to note what Iran did not attack in Israel.
Yes.
They didn't go after the water supply.
True.
Because I think they recognize that, one, that would be an attack on civilians, and two, it would also prevent Palestinians from getting fresh water as well.
True.
But again, it shows how
occupation is humanitarian always. Exactly.
Yeah, so they were very thoughtful in the nature of their attacks. That's what I don't think the West picks up on.
And this, Larry, it's impossible to explain to the West. This is tied up with Shiite theology. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand how Shiite theology is community spirit and humanitarian frame of mind, you don't understand the Islamic Republic.
Yeah.
Of course, and this implies not attacking civilians, even in the middle of a hot war, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
The genocidals in Tel Aviv, they don't have this kind of problem because for them, all of us are Amalek, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All of us.
And that's the problem.
That's the problem. Yes.
All right, my friend. Listen, I've taken up enough of your time. I always appreciate your generosity on that front.
I open an exception for you, Larry. I'm not talking to anybody these 2 or 3 days I'm at home. Only to you.
No, I appreciate that. Hopefully you're going to go have a nice meal tonight with your wife.
Yes, I'm cooking. Perfect.
What are you cooking? We got to get the Pepe Escobar recipe.
No, I'm cooking a real carbonara Roman style with pecorino romano. Very good. Which was in the fridge, I put it in the freezer.
Well, as they say in Spanish, buen provecho. In French, bon appetit.
Bon appetit.
All right, my friend. Hey, thanks for your friendship. I so appreciate it.
Come on, man. It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. And next week,